Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dirk Messner. I'm the president of the German Environment Agency, and I welcome you to the UBA conference, the European Resource Forum, which we are celebrating for the fifth time since 2012. The European Resource Forum has been established as a science-based and policy-based discussion forum for the important issue of sustainable resource management and resource use. And due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the first time we are having this conference now virtually and online, and I thank all the organizers and our partners that we made this happen. We are having 800 participants this time, which is a huge crowd of people from 50 countries, so it is really an international conference, and more than 80 speakers. And in this opening plenary and session, we have very high-ranking and very interesting speakers, which we are going to listen to in a second. We are going to listen after my brief remarks to Virginijus Sinkevicius, who is the European Commissioner for Environment, Oceans and Fishery. And afterwards, directly, we move to Stintje van Veldhoven, the Minister for the Environment from the Netherlands. And afterwards, we are going to listen to Svenja Schulze, who is the Minister for Environment here in Germany. And last but not at all least, Professor Hans Breunings, the Executive Director of the European Environment Agency. So this is what we have in front of us. As you can see, fabulous speakers, and I'm looking forward to listen to all the speakers. Before we move to Mr. Sinkevicius, I would like to develop 4 brief thoughts or remarks and hand over afterwards to our Commissioner for the Environment, the Oceans and the Fishery. The first issue which I wanted to mention briefly is the COVID-19 context, because this is important also for our discussion during the conference on resource efficiency issues. My first observation is that the corona pandemic triggers a combined health, social, economic and ecological crisis. It makes clear to all of us how impressively vulnerable our societies are. Resilience is a topic which we need to focus on. In contrast to the international financial crisis of 2008 and 2009, the corona crisis can become a springboard for the transformation towards sustainability and towards more sustainable societies. I'm optimistic in this regard for 2 reasons. The first reason is that during the next month, 12 to 33, 6 months, only the G20 countries are going to invest 12 to 20 trillion US dollars. So we have the chance now to invest this money into the future, into sustainability patterns, sustainability-oriented growth and infrastructures. We have it in our own hands. The second element why I'm optimistic is we did a study at UBA where we looked at 130 reports reflecting upon the stimulus packages as a reaction to the social and economic impacts of the corona crisis. And the astonishing result was that you find very little reports around the globe which are not focusing on investments into sustainability, climate protection, and sustainable infrastructure. So there is a mind shift here. In 2008 and 2009, the situation was really different because issues like resource efficiency, like climate and sustainability disappeared from the agenda. This is not the case this time. We have our future in our own hands. But I would like to make one important addition here. If you look into the stimulus packages reports, the issue of resource efficiency and circularity is less pronounced than, for example, climate protection. And we think that in this conference, we need to emphasize how important the resource dimension is to sustainability at large. So my second point, which I wanted to mention very briefly, is about the European Green Deal. So Mr. Sinkevicius, this is about your job. And you will give new impulses for the transition towards sustainable Europe. And some arguments around the resource issues and how important those are. So the first point which I wanted to make in this regard is that in 2019, the European Union has extracted almost 6 billion tons of raw materials in this year. This amounts for 11.3 tons per capita. In comparison, as you can see in this graph here, in comparison with raw material consumption per capita in China, which is 10% lower, we are still a high consuming raw material continent. You can also see that in the US, for example, the consumption of raw material is even higher. An additional important point is that we are importers, because most of what we are investing in material consumption is being delivered and based on imports from around the globe. This implies that if we think about sustainable consumption on resources, we do not only need to focus on our own continent and our own countries, we need to have the whole value changes in mind, which is very important for policy orientations. What you can see here is my last element as moving you into and zooming you into the picture of resource and material efficiency. What you can see here is resource productivity over the last 20 years. Look at the green curve. This is resource productivity. You can see that we had a stagnation between 2000 and 2008. Then we had the financial crisis, much less investments in the construction sector, for example, which gave a push to less consumption of resources. And afterwards, moderate growth of productivity of resource use. We are not doing a good job here. We needed much more emphasis on resource efficiency, material efficiency. And from UBA, we suggest an ambitious goal here. We could, for example, imagine setting a goal, doubling the resource and material efficiency towards 2030. We are not having strong decoupling of growth processes from resource and material consumption. Let's move to my third point. And my third point is then about the circular economy as a core element of the Green European Deal. And we highlight this point because from the UBA perspective, the German Environment Agency perspective, this is a very relevant issue. And we argue that circular economy is as important as fighting climate change. And even more so, we argue that both issues are interrelated, as I will show in a second. And in addition to that, we argue that circularity alone is not enough, because we see some signals that alone with circularity, we will not solve the resource and material issues, and some reflections in this regard. A recent study by UBA on resource-efficient decarbonization pathways shows that even the most ambitious scenarios are far away from circularity, as about only 1/3 of the reduction in primary raw material requirements can be attributed in these models to the use of secondary materials. About 2/3 are achieved through a variety of measures for efficiency, sufficiency, and substitution. I will come back to this point in a second. We can also observe that currently we have high recycling rates in some fields, for example, when it comes to copper, aluminium, or steel. But for other materials, such as the so-called critical raw materials, the recycling rates are still very low, and actually currently our technological opportunities in these fields still limited. And this implies that we need to go beyond circularity. We need to combine circularity with other instruments, and I'm coming back to this element in a second. So my next point, my fourth remark, already coming to the end, is that we argue that we should have in mind, beyond circularity, 5 recommendations. And I'm driving you through these 5 recommendations. The first element here is the issue of resource efficiency must be strengthened. So we need circularity, moving material and resources in circles, but we also, in addition to that, because we saw already, as I mentioned, the limits of circularity, we need to strengthen resource efficiency. An absolute decoupling of resource consumption from economic growth and environmental impacts is necessary, and this implies that the reduction of raw materials in absolute terms and a drastic increase in resource efficiency is needed. Following action for the Green Deal should consider targets in this regard, as I already mentioned. The second recommendation is that resource efficiency is essential for greenhouse gas neutral Europe. The transformation towards greenhouse gas neutrality will need to consider investments in infrastructures, and those are related to materials and metals, obviously. So green technologies should not only be evaluated from a CO2 reduction potential perspective, which is important, but in addition to that, we also need to look at material requirements and further environmental impacts, land use impacts, water food impacts, other resource impacts. And in a recent study, what we showed is that if we would realize an ambitious climate plan, and this is part of the European Green Deal, you would see immediately, in addition to the ambitious climate goals, we would see consumptions of materials and resources going up, increasing. And this implies that we need, from the beginning, we need to link circular economy perspectives and fighting climate change. This is one package. And we need to understand the interlinkages between those. We did a study on that, as I mentioned. We call it the rescue study. And there we show how we can combine both, bringing the emissions down in Europe to 0 in 2050. And in addition to that, reduce the use of materials and resources by 70%. If we don't combine this, we will have effective climate protection, but higher resource consumption with the negative related environmental impacts. So the third element and the third recommendation is then a perspective towards sufficiency. And this implies bringing the demand around resources down. This is the demand side of the problem. And we argue that this is as important as resource efficiency. The fourth element here is then, and this is a result of what I already said, we need an integrated approach. Climate protection and circular economy is related, as I already mentioned and showed to you. And if we talk about sufficiency and the demand side, even education and health policies are becoming important. So we need to think about more coherent and comprehensive green economy approaches, not separating one thing from the other. Climate change, protection, circular economy, resource efficiency are strongly related. And my last point before I gave over to our commissioner is my fifth recommendation here. This is about the vertical integration of our policies. In a series of studies at my organization, the German Environment Agency, we looked at different levels of activities around resource efficiency and circular economy because we can mobilize potentials at local levels, at regional levels in our countries, at our national levels, then at the European level. As we have been developing the European Green Deal, we saw that many of the initiatives need to come and can come from the European level. And my last point here, as we saw, we are importers because this is the case, we need to take responsibility also for global value chains. And we still do not reconsider this kind of dimension as strong as I would recommend it in the documents which I have been seeing from the European level. So, ladies and gentlemen, these have been my pre-remarks, and with no further delay, I'm handing over directly to our European Commissioner for Environment, Oceans and Fishery. Mr. Sikevicius, you have the word.
Thank you very much. Thank you for such good overview and introduction. And of course, thank you very much for inviting me. I know that the European Resources Forum has been already for years the place to discuss the environmental challenges of our time and to discuss how we decision makers, experts, business, civil society, media respond best to those challenges. This fifth edition of the forum comes in difficult times. We are fighting the coronavirus crisis, which aggravates across Europe and the world. At the same time, the longer term threats to our well-being have not disappeared. While doing our utmost to address the health emergency, we have to keep a steady course to a sustainable future. The mandate of our Commission started with the European Green Deal. It is our new growth strategy and our best guide for a sustainable recovery. The EU Green Deal aims at tackling the environmental crisis in a systemic manner. Climate change, biodiversity loss, unsustainable resource use, and pollution. In less than a year, the Commission has put forward a number of initiatives. We tabled a proposal for a climate law to become climate neutral by 2050 and a plan to achieve at least 55% of greenhouse gas emissions reduction by 2030 compared to 1990. Most recently, we launched the renovation wave, which will go hand in hand with a sustainable recovery from the crisis. We have a new circular economy action plan to accelerate the transition, bring the circular economy to the mainstream and underpin our recovery efforts. At the same time, the EU biodiversity strategy for 2030 and the farm to fork strategy will guide our policies to bring nature back into our lives. Last month, we adopted the chemical strategy for sustainability as part of our zero pollution ambition and the 8th Environmental Action Programme to guide EU environment and climate policy until 2030. And there are a number of other initiatives to come. We are putting the final touches to our proposal for a new batteries regulation. This is the first initiative to come under our new circular economy plan and is important, cannot be understated. Batteries are products of the future. We will need them to power electric vehicles and support our drive towards renewable energy. At the same time, they represent all the challenges that we face in our sustainable product policy. The need to reduce their footprint, to ensure sustainable sourcing, and to deal with end-of-life challenges. With our proposal for sustainable batteries, we'll aim to address for the first time the full life cycle of a product, from the resources to make it through its design, use, and of course, as I mentioned, end of life and feeding valuable materials back to the economy. We have committed to consider rules on recycled content, measures to improve the collection and recycling rate of all batteries, ensuring the recovery of valuable materials, as well as sustainability and transparency requirements, taking into account of carbon footprint of battery manufacturing and the ethical sourcing of raw materials. The batteries proposal will also prepare the ground for the sustainable product legislative initiative to come next year. I think we can build a more sustainable, smart, resilient, future-proof economy, but only by proposing solutions for the long term. This is our leading objective under the EU Recovery Plan, including the multi-annual financial framework and the Next Generation EU. Our recovery plan is historic in shape and size and unique in the world. What is essential to make it a success is to agree that we have no time for short-term fixes and no money to waste on stranded assets. That is a one-in-a-generation opportunity to put Europe on the path towards a carbon neutral, clean, sustainable, and resilient economy. Resilience means investments in key green sectors, a smart circular economy, clean energy, more energy efficiency, clean transport, sustainable food, of course, protecting and restoring biodiversity and natural ecosystems. Such investments have multiple benefits for the stability of our climate, for a cleaner environment, for better health and well-being, and for sustainable growth. We are encouraging member states to ensure that all public expenditure will need to support the green transition, including through green budgeting and green public procurement in all relevant public purchases. And together with investments, structural reforms at national level will be needed to accompany the transition, put the right price on unsustainable resource use, eliminate harmful subsidies, and apply the polluter pays principle. I am convinced that with the European Green Deal, our plans for a sustainable recovery from this crisis, we are on the right track. But we cannot walk this path alone. We know that the world's material resources, extraction and processing is almost fully responsible for global impacts on biodiversity and water stress. Those activities also account for half the climate change impacts and a third of the health impacts due to particulate matter. So we need to step up our engagement at international level. Work is ongoing to set up a global alliance for circular economy and resource efficiency. It will identify knowledge and governance gaps and take forward partnership initiatives. The Commission has also committed to exploring the feasibility of defining a safe operating space for natural resource use. This means that the use of various natural resources would not exceed certain local, regional, or global thresholds, so that environmental impacts remain within planetary boundaries. This would be important groundwork to kickstart a discussion on a possible international agreement on the management of natural resources. Ladies and gentlemen, The challenges of today and tomorrow are putting us a hard test. Acting in the best interest of present and future generation requires ambition, optimism, determination, and hard work. We have to dare to think big, and I'm sure that we can deliver this agenda for systemic change together. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Commissioner, for your fantastic keynote. And I mean, you made clear that Europe could become a pioneer in the field of sustainability transformations. And I'm relatively sure that you can count on the support of our 800 participants. Let me only ask one question and maybe a very brief answer. You talked about the different elements of the Green New Deal: procurement, circular economy, climate protection. This is also a governance problem. How is the European Commission preparing for policy coherence in this regard?
Very much for your question. First of all, probably what's most important to realize that the European Green Deal was conceived from the outset as an overarching strategy. It looks at our environmental and climate challenges together with the need to achieve sustainable economic development that leaves no one behind. And the Green Deal proposes measures in sectors promoting environmental sustainability and reducing key environmental and climate pressures: energy, industrial development, buildings and infrastructure, of course, mobility, the food system. All other initiatives have to adhere to the Green Deal's of do no harm to the environment and climate. The initiatives the Commission is proposing under the Green are ambitious, and targets are one way to make sure that this ambition is translated into measurable results. And it is by the right policy mix of rules, targets, of course, funding, and incentives that we aim to make the difference on the ground.
Thank you very much. Perfect. I thank you very much for having been with us, Mr. Sinkevicius. We all support your main ideas, and I think that during the conference and the deliberations here, we will develop ideas and recommendations which might help you to move forward on this important track, because I mean, the mind shift here is that we do not have now a sustainability strategy in addition to growth strategies and competitiveness strategies. Our competitiveness, employment and growth strategies is now focused on building a sustainable economy. And this is the mind shift which we are talking about. And thank you very much for having made this so clear, Mr. Sinkevicius. I'm handing over now to Stintje van Veldhoven. She is the Minister for the Environment in the Netherlands. Mrs. van Veldhoven, welcome to this panel, and we are looking forward to listen to you.
Thank you so much. And I'm really delighted to participate in this conference, discussing a topic which I'm sure you know is really close to my heart, because I feel it is absolutely essential for the future of our planet and people. Resource efficiency and the transition towards a circular economy. And words matter, but for me, resource efficiency is part of the circular economy, and I'll come back to that later. You're fully right to stress that the efficiency part is indispensable when we are talking about the resource approach. I'm very happy that this is a topic that brings together people from all sides of the political spectrum. And we're doing this because it is about a bright and positive future. I mean, who is a fan of waste? Nobody's a fan of waste. And the circular economy is about new ways of producing and consuming, new ways of working and living, and great many jobs for many people. Waste is a human invention, but one, I think, which we should abolish. And of course, the circumstances are really special. The world is struggling with the COVID-19 pandemic, and our hope is in finding a good vaccine. And I'm sure we will. But for climate change, there's no vaccine. We need something else to build a less vulnerable and a more resilient world. And in my view, the circular economy with a more efficient use of resources is crucial. It's our, what I would say, secret weapon to fighting climate change. We need to look beyond energy to the resources side. Since almost 50% of the greenhouse gas emissions, and that was really interesting to read reports which have been brought out in the run-up to today's conference, on housing and also the vehicles, it shows how much we can gain. And my compliments for those reports. The energy-related factors contribute to only roughly half the emissions worldwide, and the remaining share relates to the production of everything that we use. And this is a world which is growing to 10 billion people. And all of those people will want to use more resources. So our challenge is only growing, which is also, I think, something that shows in the reports. We really need to look beyond energy. We have a great pool of possibilities that we shouldn't ignore, but otherwise we're also ignoring half of the problem if we don't look towards this issue. Let's look at the textiles industry. The fashion industry is responsible for 10% of humanity's carbon emissions. That is more emissions than all international flights and maritime shipping combined. And I don't think that is a very known fact. But that is why I was very glad to have signed the denim deal last week, a deal with big parties of the denim industry. And we agreed on minimum percentages of recycled materials in new products, like the producing of 3 million pairs of jeans per year, consisting of 20% recycled denim. And with deals like this, we can influence the market. And that is why it is my ambition to build a comparative deal at the international level. I think the previous speakers mentioned the importance of the international chains. And we can make a difference, all of us from our own countries, on those worldwide chains, because we all need each other. We already did this for the plastic market after setting up a pact around plastic in the Netherlands, like France and Denmark did in their respective countries. We joined forces and we came up with the European Plastic Pact. And deals like this have several advantages, because I meet so many people that want to contribute and that all come to the conclusion that they would like to contribute, and after the but, there's always, I need somebody else. So when we are talking about the policy alignment, I think one of the most crucial things is to bring all those partners together to close the loop within certain production areas, because all of those partners can move further and faster if they cooperate. And I'm fully personally committed to unleashing the full potential of the circular economy. You might have noticed I've been speaking about this a bit more often, but we really need concerted action. And for that reason, I'm hosting a high-level World Circular Economy Forum meeting dedicated to this link between the circular economy and climate. How can a circular economy help us in achieving our common climate goals? And circularity, like I said in the beginning, really is about efficiency. Circularity is not just recycling. Circularity is about using less, about using better, about using more often, and reusing, and then recycling. So only if we make progress on all of these issues will we be able to supply a world population that is growing to 10 billion people with the resources they need to live on a livable planet. And I very much like the idea that you mentioned of a big, hairy, ambitious goal for resources. Why not jointly put an ambition on the table, for example, to do the doubling of the resource efficiency, or to contribute 1 degree to reducing climate warming? I think we need to think big, and we need to define an international ambition on resources, like the Commissioner said, I really liked your idea about that. For me, that's the core of what we should be discussing at the WCEF Plus Climate Conference, which will take place on the 15th of April, 2021 in the Netherlands and online, and you're all invited, and I'm very much looking forward to all of your ideas. Let's join forces and let's get this on the road. Thank you so much.
It was really great, Minister Veldhoven. Thank you very much for your contribution. I like your beyond energy approach, because as we see, we have been making progress in the energy field. We have been making huge progress in developing new technologies in the energy field. But we have not been seeing this kind of progresses in the resource efficiency and material efficiency perspective. And therefore, efforts are urgently needed. I will give you only one number which emphasizes what you have already been saying. If you look at processing of materials and their contribution to global CO2 emissions, this has been growing from 15% in 1995 to 23% in 2016. This is a bit counterintuitive, because we talk about dematerialization, we talk about circular economy efforts, we talk about digitalization, but the resource use perspective, even from a climate orientation, is gaining importance because we are not making progress here. Therefore, even more relevant that you are pushing this issue forward in international context. My question to you, Mrs. Veldhoven, is you talked about this interrelation between circular economy, resource efficiency, sufficiency elements. Do you have a good example from the Netherlands perspective where you are driving into this direction?
Well, we're driving it on, let's say, 5 different sectors, and we have made agreements, concrete agendas with also a lot of private partners in those areas, but also with, let's say, the public partners in those areas on what needs to be done to make progress on all of these levels. So about using less, about designing better, about design or using longer. Easy a solution is, for example, on plastics. We have taken measures to reduce the amount of plastic, which is also in our plastic pact, our national plastic pact, and the European plastic pact, which is 16 countries and I think about 300 partners have signed by now. This is about using less plastic, about starting to reuse plastic more often. We have installed in about 200 train stations in the Netherlands water tapping points so that people do not need to buy a new bottle of water every time, but can refill bottles of water. And we have installed a scheme where people get money when they bring back their bottles, so that the materials can be reused in the end. And we have agreed that all new produced bottles will contain a certain part of recycled materials. And that is how we close the loop. And all of these elements are needed to have a real reduction in the use of materials, in the production of waste, but also in the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. We need to bring all that together, and then we need to scale it up. So I'm very much for, let's say, trying to find international ways of linking our efforts, because this gives a very clear signal to the market and to international companies to invest in innovation, to invest in driving this resource-efficient circular approach, reducing greenhouse gas emissions and creating lots and lots of new jobs. Because that is also what studies show in the Netherlands. There's lots of economic activities to be expected in this new field, because reducing waste is reducing costs, and we have lots to gain on multiple fields.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Veldhoven. This was impressive. I mean, many good examples, a cascade of very interesting examples, and I like your ambition when you are arguing for doubling resource efficiency during the next decade. We will support you anyway. And I also like your international perspective, because we are an importing region, importing materials and resources. Therefore, we need to have a look at the value chains, which are global, and how to make them sustainable and support to make them sustainable, cooperating with developing countries and emerging economies. I can assure you that the cooperation activities between your Environment Agency and our Environment Agency is very dense, and we hope that together we can support all your activities, Minister Veldhoven. Thank you very much that you have been with us and for your fantastic contribution.
For having me.
Thank you. So we are moving forward and are going to listen now to the German Minister for Environment, who sent us a video, which you are going to see now.
Commissioner Sinkevicius, Virginius, Dirk Messner, ladies and gentlemen, the issue of resources is becoming more and more important, and this is clearly reflected in the fact that the Federal Environment Agency is already organizing the European Resource Forum for the 5th time. And I would like to thank the Federal Environment Agency for the program of this forum, which established the main correlations. For instance, the correlation with European circular economy policy, climate action, and chemicals policy. The Resource Forum is intentionally European in its focus, and this is clearly demonstrated by the fact that we are kicking off the event with the European perspective from the Commission. We will also hear the Dutch point of view. And this input is especially important for our Council presidency, during which Germany is actively advancing the EU's main projects under our presidency motto, Together for Europe's Recovery. Europe is already on the right track. With the European Green Deal, the European Commission has presented a groundbreaking strategy to make Europe stronger, fairer, and more sustainable. Circular economy is an integral part of the Green Deal. It means extending the lifespan of products and ensuring more resources stay in the economic cycle. Resource efficiency is the key to achieve climate neutrality and making supply chains less dependent on primary raw materials. And this too is the lessons learned from the coronavirus crisis. The Commission's Circular Economy Action Plan, published in March, is very ambitious. It aims to restructure the European economy, aligning it more closely with circular economy principles. The goal here is to use resources more intelligently and efficiently. And that is why I welcome and support the action plan. At the heart of this action plan is a new product policy. The plan contains a range of measures focusing particularly on product design and better information for consumers. Product design is vital for ensuring that today's products are not tomorrow's waste. The goal has to be durable, repairable, and recyclable products. I firmly believe that this is also what the other EU member states want, and consumers have been waiting for this for a long time. Digitalization too is important for a circular and resource-efficient economy. For instance, it can help us provide better consumer information. We put digitalization on the agenda for our presidency, and it is important to me to minimize the potential negative impacts of digital technologies and on the environment. These technologies should be part of the solution and a tool for more climate action and environmental protection, also as an aspect in circular economy. Ladies and gentlemen, the Commission is also looking at the waste sector with a focus on recycling and the secondary raw material market as well as waste prevention. With regard to packaging in particular, we still have too much unexploited potential. The often short lifespan of packaging is a waste of resources, and we need European solutions. We must have better standards for recycling packaging so that it can be used safely everywhere. Alongside this, we need an increasing proportion of recyclates in as much packaging as possible. The Commission's proposal also includes the international dimension. For instance, a global circular economy alliance and stepping up the international fight against plastic waste. I would like to encourage the European Commission to turn its plan into actions. In terms of content, I support the main points set out by the Commission. In the December Environment Council, I would like to adopt Council conclusions on circular economy that are supported by all Member States, and I am confident that we will succeed in this endeavour. I hope the conference provides you all with many new insights, interesting presentations, and a good discussion. I thank you very much.
So we thank our Minister for her keynote and her reflections on circular economy, climate protection, and the overall context of the European Green Deal. And we are now coming to the last speaker of this first panel, who is Hans Breunings. And Hans is the Executive Director of the European Environment Agency, one of our most important partners, obviously. So Hans, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dirk, and good morning all who are joining us from wherever you are in Europe or the world. Also, thank you for the opening words of the Commissioner and the two ministers, which I think have set the stage very nicely to share some of the ideas of the European Environment Agency in this very important discussion. And as you can see, the title of my presentation links resource efficiency, which I think Dirk Messner has really emphasized, to a circular perspective and a low carbon perspective on where the economy should be going. And I think the relationships between those three elements will be critical, not only at a European level, but also for Europe in a global perspective. And let me point out some of the critical challenges there. we see an increasing global material use and also globalized value chains. And of course, whatever Europe does must be linked to an understanding of what position we have in this global perspective. A second element is that we see changing demographics and incomes on this planet, which means more and more of a middle-class lifestyle that also brings consumption and production that is critical to where we are going with resource efficiency, circularity, and low carbon futures. And then we've got the distribution of social impacts of material use, health impacts, labor conditions, how we source materials, where the waste ends up, and what the impact on society is, and on climate and natural habitats of species, and those things are not equally spread. Then the distribution of supply chain know-how. There is an enormous amount of know-how that we could use to go to a more resource efficient circular economy, but unfortunately that know-how is lacking in places, and in other places it is highly unequally distributed. And then of course the important issue of virgin versus recycled materials, which has been mentioned before. Let me first go to the grand scheme, and Dirk Messner showed the European graph here. If we look at the global level, and this is from the International Resource Panel, you see an overall increase of the use of resources, also of fossil fuels and also of biomass. And of course, here we have the critical link to the low carbon economy and also the protection of ecosystems and biodiversity. So these will be critical challenges in the future. And unfortunately, over the last 2 decades, we have seen at a global level resource productivity decline. In Europe, we've seen a bit of an increase, but of course, we cannot look at the European increase in productivity without taking into account the global perspective, as these value chains are and material flows are often linked to each other. So we need to reflect in our policies how we are part of this global dimension. The good news is that in Europe, indeed, resource efficiency has been improving. It has been improving rather unequally in different countries in Europe. And what is also very apparent from this graph is that resource efficiency across Europe is really extremely different across the countries. So if we look at the EU 28 in the middle there, that is indeed an average with a rather broad spectrum of different realities, and the standard distribution probably is too high if we want a strong European perspective on this. So that is also a challenge in formulating policies and targets. Another concerning element is that waste generation is still increasing. If you look in the last decade to the rising GDP in Europe, and you compare that to the average population, you see that waste generation is following more the GDP than the average population. So we continue to increase waste production in Europe. And yes, we are recycling more, but the potential for increased recycling across the board is still very large. If you look at the construction and demolition waste, where we have the highest maximum potential for recycling and rather high recycling rates currently, there is still quite a bit of perspective to improve. But especially if we look at municipal waste, we could double the recycling rates there, and in electronic and equipment, that is even more the case. So we are still leaving a lot, even just at the recycling, to be had in European countries, and that in a continent that is indeed rightly so. When we say we are leading, that is indeed the case, but even then we still have a massive amount of improvement that is possible. Where, of course, the biggest improvement is possible is in the actual circular use of materials. Yes, Europe has put the concept of circular economy on the map, the period between 2015 and today has been critical in institutionalizing the concept, in starting monitoring, in offering tools, and putting it, I would say, altogether very high on the political agenda, and making connections to climate change and connections to biodiversity. But overall, we only see a very slow increase in the actual use of circular use of materials. So the next step, the Circular Economy 2.0 package, will have to actually translate this into a significant increase in the actual circular use of materials. Now, one of the things that is also lacking, and this is at the core of what the European Environment Agency does, is allowing us to monitor the progress in this circular economy in much more detail and where it matters. We only have a rather sketchy view of the circular economy, especially when it comes to products, to sectors, and when it comes to the whole chain of the use of materials. And together with the EPAs in Europe, and in particular with strong support of the Italian EPA, but also with partners in the public and private sphere like the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, the World Economic Forum, OECD, and others, we have set up the so-called Bellagio process, where we are formulating 7 principles for the monitoring of a circular economy that allows stronger governance, and in support of stronger governance, that is built also on innovation and collaboration across the value chain and between public and private partners, that crosses jurisdictions as well, because a lot of our policies are still based on sort of the state borders, but material flows by definitions are not doing that. And we look at flows, footprints, and socioeconomic aspects and policies. We will shortly launch this project, and we hope that it can be a strong support for the European policy agenda. And that is where I would like to end my short presentation. That is indeed that the Circular Economy Action Plan 2.0 offers great opportunity, because it looks at key supply chains. It puts increased emphasis on waste prevention, and we've seen that there is a lot of scope there. It's also connecting to consumers by empowering them through information and through choices that they can make in a more intelligent way. It will work much more strongly on secondary materials markets, which is really lacking at the moment in many different perspectives. It looks at hazardous substances as a critical barrier to circular economy. We don't want to build up toxicity, for example, in a circular economy. So this is absolutely critical. It has a strong science-based approach, and that includes, I think, also the monitoring and the innovation there. And then, of course, there are the strong interlinkages with the energy transition, the industrial transformation, and I would say also with the use of bio-based materials, which play a critical role in the circular economy and in the low carbon economy, but where we have to be very careful to make intelligent choices. So in conclusion, I would say Europe is probably the place where the thinking about resource efficiency and circular economy is most advanced, where we have the most ambitious and most forward-looking policy agenda now to drive that agenda. And so now we need to make it happen. And the investments that were mentioned by all the previous speakers as a stimulus package, and also under the Green Deal and the MFF, I think are a strong basis on the public side. And now we need to make sure that we connect this in the best possible way to private investments and to really driving this necessary agenda forward. Thank you, and Dirk, over to you again.
Good. Thank you very much, Hans, for your fantastic presentation. I mean, I liked that you started with the social aspects of sustainability, talking about resource consumption, material consumption, because this is an issue which we need to focus on, because as importers of materials and resources, as European importers, we need to take responsibility in this regard also. And then regarding the ecological dimensions, the picture which we have in front of us, Hans, and this is where I'm coming to my first question to you, no, is actually dramatic, because you showed that globally we have material and resource efficiency quota which is still declining. We are not only not making progress, it's declining. And in the European context, what we saw is that between 2000 and 2008, before the financial crisis started, we had a stagnation in resource and material efficiency, and after the crisis, a very modest resource efficiency gain. No? So many challenges still. We are not on track at all. And my question in this regard would be, where are the leverage points, the major ones? Do you see, looking at digitalization and digital technologies, do you see there leverage points which might help us to leapfrog in the field?
Yes, thanks for the question, Dirk. I think there are many leverage points. First of all, and I think important in Europe, is that we are now coming with a stronger policy that is interconnected with other policies, and that will drive investments and public and private decision makers in the right direction. A second element, I think, is indeed that we can use technology and a variety of technologies, not only technologies on materials proper, but also technologies like the digital economy in support of the more circular use and resource efficiency agenda. But as we know from the work also under the German presidency, and I think one needs to make the smart choices there. Digitalization per se is not the answer. It is a particular kind of digital tools that will be in support. And so that could be, I think, a part of a European brand of digital economy, a digital economy that is in fact more driving towards sustainability, that reflects on its own sustainability and material use. And there is a lot of material use in the digital economy proper, and one that strengthens the capacity of citizens and policymakers to make the right choices. And if we can make that type of link, we are really working on a strong European approach to linking digitalization to a sustainable development agenda.
Thank you very much, Hans, for your answer. We do have time still for one or two more questions. My next question would be looking at political instruments. No, I mean, all speakers argued that circularity, then in combination with resource and material efficiency, sufficiency issues, international value chain, this is all very complex. No? And this might make progress more difficult than in the climate field. In the climate field, we have one most important instrument, the CO2 price probably, and then many other additional initiatives. No? Do you see any functional equivalent for the CO2 price in the field of circular economy to overcome this complexity challenge of policy packages?
Yes, I think it's clear that economic incentives together with regulatory incentives like product policies and extended producer responsibility are for me a package. And it's clear that we undervalue the use of natural resources in the cycle. It's clear that wasting is far too cheap. But it's also clear that there is a strong link, I think, with product policies per se. If you think of you could call it junk consumption that we are doing and the lifetime and life cycle of products, it's clear that also there the economic incentives are not to produce products that last very long, and it's not to produce products that have a good chance of ending up in a circular economy perspective. So using market forces with other instruments in a smart combination, I think, is the way forward.
Much, Hans. I think last question goes again to governance settings. No, I mean, we discussed now with the Commissioner for Environment, but listening to all our presentations here and the discussion which we are having the picture is that we need to integrate sustainability issues, climate issues, resource efficiency issues, ecosystem issues in any domain of European policy making in the Commission. This is the big difference. No, it goes beyond environmental policy, where the environmental commissioner is responsible. It's cross-cutting. Which kind of governance reforms would you imagine to make this happen, to get the policy coherence perspective right? You are one of the main experts in the field of European policymaking. Which kind of innovations are needed in this regard, governance of within the Commission itself?
I think it's fair to say that the European Green Deal as such, and the framing of the European Green Deal, is a governance and a policy innovation already. I mean, it is the first time that the European institutions have framed a bundle of policies under the Green Deal framing that is so much forward-looking, that is so integrated in its vision, and they have also set up a governance structure that is more integrated than we've seen before. The portfolio, the responsibility of Executive Vice President Frans Timmermans, you could say, has the production perspective. It is agriculture, it's fisheries, it's transport, it's energy, but also has the impact on environment and climate as part of that portfolio. And that's where we see biodiversity, circular economy, and we also see climate change. So bringing that together in a sort of drivers, but then also responses in the end perspective, I think in and of itself is innovative. Of course, the wheels of change institutionally turn slowly, and if you look at scientific analysis, too slowly. So we will need to speed that up and go really to the core of systemic change. But also there, I think the Green Deal is the first time that Europe is framing a systemic agenda. You could say that the pushback of parts of the system can be hard. If you look at the CAP discussions, it's obvious that there is still a very rough discussion going on there, and we will see where it lands. If you look at the pushback, especially on speed of innovation in some sectors, is still large. That is a critical issue to take care of. But I think in principle at the European level, the perspective of integration and coherence is much better than we've had before. And in all fairness, I think I'm not so sure that is the case in most member states. So linking that across the different levels, as you, Dirk, mentioned in your introduction as one of your 5 recommendations, I think is absolutely critical as well.
Thank you very much, Hans. As always, very insightful reflections from your side. I mean, only 2 last points from my perspective. Now, the first one is, I agree with you when you argue that the European Green Deal as such is already something like a governance innovation, because it puts sustainability issues at the center, and all the other fields of policy arenas now have to be aligned. And this is a huge change. No? I have been heading a science committee helping the German government to implement the German sustainability strategy. And one of our critical points has always been that we have a sustainability strategy, but in addition to that, we have an employment strategy, and we have a growth strategy, and we have a competitiveness strategy. So the innovation is in putting sustainability at the center and aligning the rest towards sustainability. So complete agreement, Hans. No? And my second point, let's see what is going to happen this night in the United States. There might emerge a new geo-economic constellation towards sustainability. No? In this regard, I'm cautiously optimistic. So we need to come to an end. I think we had a good start. I thank you, Hans, and all the other speakers a lot that you contributed to this discussion. I wanted to remember all of our participants that we are recording the sessions and the plenary sessions, so that you can look at those again at the conference homepage if you would like to do so. With these words, I'm coming to the end. Thank you to the organizers also, and thank you to the logistical teams. It has been working well with our virtual instruments here. And after our panel session, the next panel session, which will be moderated by Harry Lehmann, is the plenary session number 1 after this opening session, which will focus on the nexus between resource use and climate change. And with these words, I send you into the break. Thank you very much.
Really good opening session.